Welcome to Wealthy Living Conversations. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wellthy Living. It's here that I connect with a variety of people to have insightful and inspiring conversations to help you live a meaningful, connected and well life, both personally and professionally. So in today's episode, I'm talking to Michael Ellis. Michael designs and delivers creative culture strategies for companies that want to change the world for good. As people begin to trickle back into communal spaces, there's a real opportunity to do this in a more considered and a more aligned way. So as Michael's work's based on the foundation of self-awareness and empathy, they're two qualities that I strongly believe enhance the connection and in turn, both the sustainable success, both personally and professionally. So I felt it was a really good opportunity to bring Michael on the show today and discuss things that he sees as great insights and also that inspires action as we begin to create a new normal. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Pleasure. So apart from like new health and safety protocols, why do you think it's a time to do things differently?
Because we have to. There's no choice. It's not a luxury to. It's not a luxury or a choice to do things differently. We simply have to, because the world's changed drastically and dramatically and quickly, and we have to adapt to that. Because if we don't, people suffer and are suffering, and and it's not just our experience of work, but it's the entire system that we're operating in. It has changed and is changing. So the more we can be conscious of what changes are required to support people at work, then I think the better we'll be at designing the kind of changes that are going to be. They're going to support people. I think that's probably the most important thing at the moment is how do we support people at work, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. So I think I want to focus our conversation today then around the importance of, I suppose, in the fact that we've changed and we've been doing life in a more integrated way where people have been working from home and they've been, dealing with their families at the same time as bringing people into their sort of workspaces through Zoom calls, their home spaces through Zoom calls, and they've integrated exercise programs and changed the way they eat. And, people have done things differently now for quite a while. So I think it'd be really good to focus on the importance of bringing your whole self to work and why putting more focus on, say, human behaviour and personal development is necessary for professional development and is a key to better business outcomes moving forward. Does that sound good?
Yep, absolutely. It's really interesting that you said, workplace, and then you kind of corrected and said, home, like our home and our work, home spaces and workplaces
yep.
are the same for a lot of people and have been. So this dichotomy or the binary of like work and home, it's not as separate as it used to be, and so I feel like it's really just accelerated. The circumstances of remote working or working from home have accelerated what I think was always necessary, which is bringing the work and the home the work and the outside of work experience. Not bringing them together, but having them be more integrated. So there's not that binary of this is me at home and this is me at work. And for those things to be, or those personas to be two distinctly different things. Now, of course, you're going to have different roles to play given the context you're in. However, if you're talking about bringing your whole self to work, then we have to acknowledge that the separation between work and not work isn't as clear cut as it used to be. And so workplaces, whatever they look like, whether they're physical spaces or whether they're home offices or whether they're working from anywhere, as employers and as leaders or as people who are keen to provide a positive experience of work and support people at work, we need to look at how do we enable people to bring their whole selves to work. And I think in the past that used to be, you can bring your whole self to work so long as it's the best parts of yourself. We don't really want to see the parts where you're struggling, because we're not set up to support you in that, because that's not what work was for. That's not what the workplace was for. Yeah. And so it's really interesting now that there's a need. It's not just an expectation that people have of their employer or their workplace, but there's a need, there's a fundamental need people have now of being supported, because generally I think people are bringing the best they have to work, but that also comes with a need to be supported when you need it. And so there's an expectation now that workplaces, employers support that provision of whatever it is that people need, because you can't have one without the other. It's not fair to expect people to come to work and bring their best and not support them when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, this workplace integration, I think that's the shift that people used to always talk about, work-life balance. And I think that, the aim is to have this great work-life balance. And, as a person in wellbeing and going into companies and talking, I even remember doing stuff on, how do you achieve a work-life balance? And I think that concept is starting to sort of shift and move to the side to be replaced with, well, we don't really want work and life balance. We want work-life integration.
Yeah. And I think we want balance, right? And work is part of that.
Yeah,
work is part of our life.
Exactly.
But there's lots of aspects within our life as well. There's our family life. There's our relations, our relationship with our partners and friends and family. There's our relationship to ourselves and our own health and well-being. These are all aspects of our life that we don't sort of tend to think of as separate. Work is separate. The language of work has made it separate to our life. So you get work in your life, and now let's try and bring them together. It never has been separate, and it's always been a part of, because you don't stop your life, you don't stop living, or you don't stop who you are when you go to work. You might adapt, how you, what you do, but you're still the same person with all the same issues and insecurities or doubts or fears or whatever it is that you had before you walked through the door of that workplace. And so it's a bit of a false kind of dichotomy that I don't think ever really existed, but we kind of talked and talk like it did and work like it did, that work and life are these separate things. They aren't. And now it's really clear that they aren't. And so this concept of integration is a step towards balance, and it's multifaceted, and work is just one of those facets.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the big things that comes up with that is when we don't get to, because I mean, we are as humans emotional beings, and I suppose in the past, like you said, people sort of left that part of that, almost that emotional part, unless they were positive emotions, sort of check them at the door when they came into the workspaces or the workplaces. And now it's about bringing that whole person to work. But what that brings up is this new way of interacting with people that is going to be, I don't know, we're sort of going to move between like that space of when does it become acceptable, what's not acceptable, are we going to feel judged, what's going to come up for us, how are we going to feel triggered? And so it highlights that real need for personal development and how that personal development really impacts the professional development. And you can't just do professional development without first sort of getting to know yourself and really doing your own personal development journey, sort of like a me first for a better we.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think the personal and professional development is a dichotomy that is very much part of the narrative of work. But again, we're seeing that as not actually being the case, and I would also argue that it never was the case. So I think you're right. A couple of things you mentioned which I think are really important. First, the fact that the personal development and professional development aren't separate. Again, it's like work and life are not separate. There's a lot of overlap there, and so if we're talking about developing professionally in our roles, then I mean, who is it? I mean, what is it that we're developing? It's ourselves. So it is self-development, and it might be an aspect of that self that is applied at work, but it's still self-development, and it cannot be separated from other aspects of self, because it's all related, and it's all one impacts the other. So it's I would consider them to be it's development, but within different aspects or different arenas, but it's still development of the self. That's important to acknowledge. And the other thing is that workplaces, I don't think, are prepared enough and set up enough to facilitate this in the way in which they need to. We're catching up, and there are a lot of workplaces who are ahead of the curve here, and have been supporting people in a truly holistic way for quite some time. But a lot of workplaces are going, oh, shit, what do we do now when people are coming to work and they're having the courage and the vulnerability to say that they're stressed, or that they're anxious, or that they're having these issues that are impacting their work. In good faith, they're bringing these issues, to the workspace, because the workspace has said, we want you to bring your whole self to work, and so people are, and then they're not equipped to deal with it. And so I think there's a lot of learning that needs to happen to support leaders and support employees and colleagues to have those sorts of conversations, which make bringing all aspects of yourself to work a safe thing to do. Yeah. and normalizing that. So there's a lot of what would otherwise be sort of called personal development that has to happen now in order to develop more emotionally intelligent workplaces.
Absolutely. And I think that that's like you said, the personal development journey for the leaders as well. So often leaders have taken a role, like traditionally, of, I suppose, more of a hierarchical role, where they sort of have certain demands, but they're not really, they send people to HR department or to wherever else when it comes to the more personal, or the communication, or the effective communication, or those conversations that need to be had. And they've been in the past, I suppose, and there still probably is, and a lot of transition needed, but that the conversations are really sort of structured rather than free and free flowing, and really enable a lot of active listening or good effective conversation and communication skills. There's been, these are the things, this is the agenda, this is what we're going to work through. Oh, well, no, but that doesn't come to the agenda. Let's go back onto the agenda. And it's highlighting now the lack of personal interaction skills, that, like you said, that emotional intelligence. So again, that personal development journey, though it's not for the faint-hearted, and it'll open Pandora's box, and a whole lot of things will come out, but it's so necessary in order to develop and have effective relationships. And in the end, whether it's a personal relationship or an effective relationship, if we can get relationships, the dynamic of relationships working better, then people are going to have a better sense of fulfillment, which is going to lead to less judgment and more curiosity and more compassion and just more connected conversations and interactions, which, like I said in the beginning, all those things are just going to lead to more professional growth and more business growth and more productivity. So greater fulfillment, greater productivity. And I think that businesses really got to start to recognize this.
Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't agree with everything you said more. I think, you know, key thing that comes out, I think what we've always realized, but it's never really been such an urgent kind of in your face demand to be recognized. And that is that everything is relationships.
Everything.
Leaders will perform, like leaders will lead. They might lead a function, they might lead a process, they might lead, you know, a team. But ultimately it's people that are performing the function, contributing to the process. And unless you acknowledge that and account for that, then you're just missing the greatest opportunity to succeed in whatever the metric of success is, whatever the measurement is. As you say, it all comes back to relationships. And if you're not comfortable or competent or even capable in managing your relationship with others, then that's where we need to start. Like those are the conversations. That's the kind of, you know, professional development, the kind of workshops, the kind of conversations that we need to be having, and not shaming people for not knowing how to do it, and not shaming people for not feeling you know, comfortable in doing that, because it is uncomfortable, but it's essential, and we have to do it now, because people are suffering and really struggling. People are, let alone the output of the business or the, you know, the bottom line, however that's measured. I mean, that's probably always the first indicator that people will go, we've got a problem here. But the antecedent to that problem was, you know, had been around for a long time, and that's people sort of struggling, you know, and that's what we need to address. I think that's the most urgent prerogative of any business right now is caring for the people that are working in the business, caring for people, full stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a really good point by saying that a lot of things don't happen because of shame. And when people feel shame, it really stunts that opportunity for growth, because, I mean, I think that that's really, shame is at the core of a lot of relating issues. You know, the inability, you know, when we feel shame, we often just, so much comes up that it's really, really hard to move forward. So we have to provide these environments that are, or companies need to provide environments, and the people in the companies where shame, where people don't feel shame and they feel safe to be vulnerable, they feel safe to communicate their needs really, really openly, and not feel like they're going to lose their job because of it, or not feel that they're going to be judged or blamed or, like you said, shamed. Because once they feel shamed, there goes the flow in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's so wonderful that we're having this conversation, and it's a conversation about what's happening in workplaces or what needs to happen in workplaces. The kind of conversation we wouldn't have been having 10 years ago. Yeah. So there's a culmination of a lot of factors that have led to this. One, I think, some wonderful work and research and sort of very widely accessible, you know, tools and resources about this, about psychological safety in the workplace, about shame in the workplace, about vulnerability. So we're now developing a greater awareness of what all this means. So, you know, and it's making it easier for us to have conversations and start addressing some of these issues. So that's timely. And of course, the way in which work is, and the world has been disrupted in the last 18 months, has been another factor that's brought all of these issues to the surface. And so now it's our job, I think it's our most important job, everybody's most important job, to address these issues. And it's important to acknowledge too that like we're figuring it out. Like we're doing this for the first time. And if you don't know, then that's a good place to start. If you don't know how to, that's great, because you can learn. And this, you know, the what typically happens around shame, it's kind of perpetuates. You know, you might feel shame around not doing or performing particularly well. Then you don't know how to deal with it. Somebody else doesn't know how to deal with it. And we default to these really kind of self-protective defensive mechanisms, which amplify shame and don't address any of the issues in the first place. And so just, you know, leaders and anyone who has the courage just to put their hand up and say, look, I don't know how to do this well, but I reckon we can figure it out together. That's such a wonderful place to start, because it's honest, it's integral, it's solution focused, and it's just acknowledging where people are at. And I think we're too quick to default to how do we solve this, or what's the solution, or how do we fix what's broken, as opposed to going, let's just put that aside for the moment, and let's just acknowledge where we are, and let's just start there and be comfortable, you know, to do that. I think that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head. Like, the most powerful 3 words that somebody can use really is, I don't know. Or I don't understand, or tell me more. You know, they're just 3, you know, basic language, basic words that probably don't get used enough, but have so much power to them.
Yeah, and they're empowering too. I guess contrary to a lot of sort of old school thinking, is that it's a really empowering, it's a really creative, and it's really generative kind of place in which to start to say, I don't know, because then you start, it just opens up so many avenues of investigation or conversation or possibilities. If we're, you know, have the courage to be vulnerable enough to say so, and just to sit in that liminal space of we don't know. And again, the circumstances of the pandemic over the last 18 months have forced everybody into that state one way or another. And we can't pretend that we do know what's going to happen, or that we have a solution, or that there is a solution, or that things aren't fundamentally broken and breaking. We have to acknowledge that. And I think the less we, you know, resist that, the more we just go, okay, let's just pause for a moment and let's address what's actually going, how we're feeling, and that we don't know, and start from there. It's just I mean, imagine if those sorts of conversations were happening more regularly at work, as opposed to going, all right, we need to fix this, and we need to fix it by the end of the quarter because we've got these targets to meet. And it's bypassing the elephant in the room, which is, you know, what's actually going on, which needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I think that one thing that's really lacking, therefore, like, is that people think like the word conversation is something that has been used and everybody knows it for all their life. But I don't think people have really stopped to think about what makes an effective conversation. And it's not about just one person speaking. A conversation is an exchange. So, you know, and it's an exchange in the way that you're able to be emotionally intelligent enough to go, all right, well, I've got this lot of information, and even if it is about what the goals of the company are, or what our, you know, where we want to go and what outcomes we want to achieve, but how can we speak to different people in different ways and not just have this generic set of dialogue that is not able to be heard and doesn't create any engagement and doesn't really allow for that connection. Because once you've got the connection, then the results are going to just automatically flow on. But you've got to be able to have effective conversation, which means being able to deliver it in a way that can be heard. So, you know, how do you put the information or the data into, say, consumer speak, which speakers or effective speakers might be able to do, but every person needs to be able to do, and especially managers.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote. I don't know who it's attributed to, but it's something like, nobody cares about how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
Something like that. The point of it being is communication is not about information. I think, we chatted about this the other day, like the information that you would otherwise have communicated in a conversation or in a meeting, there's better ways to disseminate that information now, in asynchronously or more quickly, or in a way that's far more effective. Technology is enabled us to do that. So communication is not just about sharing information, but if it is information that needs to be shared personally, then we are so overwhelmed with input at the moment that we have to start, and by default, we're becoming really good at just filtering out stuff that isn't relevant, that we don't need to hear. And we have to for our own health and well-being, emotional health and well-being, particularly when it comes to the news and so on. But so we've become really good at filtering stuff. When it comes to communicating, you have to find it's almost like a permission. You should have permission to communicate with somebody, or at least to be sharing something with them first. And that, I think people are starting to become a lot more aware of the boundaries, personal boundaries around bandwidth, in terms of what I can take on and what's for me and what I'm going to allow into my space. And so I'd like to think that that's having a flow-on effect in terms of our intent when it comes to communication. As in, am I just kind of just fire hydranting all of this information at you because I think you need to know it, and if that's the case, people are just going, no, that's not. I'm not here for that, and I'm not. I mean, it's not an effective way of communicating in the first place. So, getting some permission and finding out about how to really connect with people, what matters to them, to having the empathy to just stop for a moment and just check in and just be aware of the context in which you're communicating. I mean, these are basic, fundamental, humaning skills that I'd like to think are now being taught because they need to in the workplace. And there should be a greater awareness of communication. I mean, we know how to communicate, but there's a nuance now, which I think is far more important when it comes to communication. And that is that people are overwhelmed, and people are being really selective about, what they allow into their kind of space. Yeah. And so as consumers of too much information, we are learning how to do that because we have to for our own well-being. And as communicators, I think what's starting to happen is we're becoming more aware of not just the message, but the impact of that. And we should be taking responsibility for that. And of course, that applies in the workspace as well. Time is our most valuable commodity. And if we're wasting it just communicating information that could be communicated far more effectively, then that's a disservice to people. And hopefully people are going, creating some healthy boundaries around that. So the way in which we communicate is changing as well, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting what you bring up. And I think that the empathy is a really important piece, because you've got to be able to understand how someone else feels in that situation. And in order to do that, you've got to ask good questions and inquire and be inquisitive. Because like you said, time is a currency, and everybody has only a limited amount of it. So people have got boundaries to what they want to put in their time and what they don't want to put in time. But we've got to remember the discernment that what's important to one person is not necessarily important to another. People value different things. And so it's not necessarily about going, well, this is what I value, so I'm not going to make space for you to talk about what you want to talk about and just dismiss that. So that can't happen either, because that would not be great for interaction. But where what I think's really the most important is what you said, is about the permission. So having a set of agreements that can be formal or informal that are made before. So it might be that that we're both in the workplace, and I want to discuss something with you, and you are really quite busy and you don't have time to necessarily hear what I have to say. But it's my job to say, Michael, I really would love to talk about something. Have you, is it okay if we have a discussion now? Do you have space for me to share with you at this time? And then that gives you that opportunity, without being rude, without being disrespectful, to be able to insert that boundary without me feeling like you personally don't care about anything I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of crazy that we know we taught this in kind of kindergarten, right? And at school, and but then it sort of gets lost. This respect for another, and there's an implied, for too long, based on the structure of work and the structure of particularly a patriarchal structure and a hierarchical structure, where it's like, okay, by virtue of this role that I have, I feel entitled to communicate in this way. Like, it's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable, and it never was, and now it's coming to kind of stark kind of highlight focus that this has to change. So one, I think it's a basic fundamental kind of human rights and respect issue for the other. And then if we want to talk about how to be effective communicators, then we have to acknowledge that we have to acknowledge what is valuable for the other, for the other person, and to kind of just step out of your desire or your need to communicate whatever it is in whichever way you choose, and stop and go, well, hang on. First of all, where's this person at? As you say, do they have time? Am I imposing on their time? Am I respectful of their time and their space, and whether this is an appropriate time, emotionally or, energetically, or, for them? And just taking the time to kind of check in and establish some agreements and a container for a conversation. That doesn't have to be with every conversation, but particularly if it's one that, is an important one, then these are the fundamentals that we have to do. And a lot of people have to learn that, and have to keep remembering, keep applying, keep learning that, because culturally, it's not always the norm for how we communicate, which is, again, one of those things we need to address.
Yeah, and that probably brings me to another thought that I had, which is that conversations, like here we are talking about, changing the culture within the organization to have better conversations, but conversation in itself is fundamentally a ritual. Mm-hmm. So it's the way that we speak, the way that we speak and the way that a person speaks. It has to do with the cultures that they're in, the cultures that they've been brought up in, and the society that they've, what society has taught them or expected of us. And so I think it's time to question our preconditioned belief systems, so that we can, all live to our full potential within all of our different situations, including work. So, the way that, let me give you an example, the way that genders respond differently in conversations is going to be based on preconditioned beliefs or society's culture in the way that, women or girls behave compared to boys have behaved, So like, even when it comes to things like saying it wrong or saying it right, you'll see in a meeting, a lot of males will just be more assertive and more directive, and a lot of females may sit back and it's not, and be judged maybe at the end of that meeting by not having enough input, or being seen as not having as much confidence. But it's just a society thing of the way that we've culturally been brought up in different genders.
Yeah. Oh man, this is so pertinent. I mean, it's so urgent that we address this now. And if, you know, it's a big issue, but if you think of it, I mean, the way in which I think of it is what can I, like, how am I complicit? Because it needs to change, right? The culture is not something that exists outside of us. It's something that we contribute to, that we are very much a part of, whether that be explicitly or implicitly. We're complicit to the culture, whatever it is, if we can identify and see it, and if we're a part of it. So I think we have a responsibility to fix it now, particularly I speak as a middle-aged white man, entirely privileged, and there's so much learning that I am responsible to do for myself, so that I'm not perpetuating a culture that is damaging, destructive, sexist, or misogynistic. Now, whether my behavior is directly contributing to that or not is one thing, but I'm complicit to it because I represent that culture. I'm a part of it. I was brought up in it, I work in it, and I exist in it. So we have to. It's a very personal thing to take responsibility for, and workplaces have an opportunity to create, foster a culture that is an alternative to the one that is broken. Now, it's not one culture either. There's, as you talked about before, there's a confluence of cultures. There's your individual, your family, your society, your gender, your wherever you come from, your conditioning is you've got lots of cultures that you bring. I've got lots that I bring. Everyone else we work together with, it's a melting pot of cultures. But there is something that we have some control over, which is the culture of the workplace, however that's defined, the workplace. But the culture, we can have some influence on that, and that's the way in which we do that is by having some expectations and some rituals and some non-negotiables. This is some examples of how we do things around here, and justifying why that's the case. And so it's really clear that this is the kind of culture we want to create, because we believe in this, whatever that is. And so we have to acknowledge the culture in which we're in, and if we want to change it, then we have to be really clear about what those actions, what those behaviors are, and what they're not too. So we can call them out when we need to. And again, it's something that we have to do. In Australia at the moment, you look at the inquiry into parliamentary culture, and it's urgent. It's the most important thing I think that businesses, workplaces need to be focusing on now is how are people being treated? What kind of culture is being perpetuated or created?
Absolutely. And I think that's why, like, going back to what we discussed in the beginning, why personal development is really so important, because the first place is obviously acknowledgement, and then acknowledging that you want to do something about it. But in order to do something about it, we've really got to take that personal responsibility for our own personal development, and that's developing our emotional intelligence. And it's not an easy ride. It's going to bring up so much stuff, and it also is going to start bringing up your own shame and your own guilt and your own questioning of yourself and your purpose and your meaning and your fulfillment. And I think that this time has allowed a lot of people to do that, from whatever role you have within an organisation. And that's why we're seeing things, the label of the Great Resignation being so common now. And that's because people are starting to question everything. And what is my purpose, and what is my meaning, and what do I want out of a life, and what are my values, and what have I been taught, and what have I just gone along with? because my conditioning has led me to that place, but is that really something that I want to continue with? And are these belief systems mine, or are these conditioned? And all these questions have come up for so many people, and this is the personal development work, and this is the crux of what enables humans to get to the place that we want in this sort of, as we have the human experience on this planet. So I think that, like we said, this integration between work and life is one. Like, work is a part of life, and it is a personal development training in itself. And when people start seeing that and start recognizing the triggers that come up in these different situations and addressing them instead of ignoring them, then we start moving forward.
But that's the reality of our time. Nothing like a global pandemic and literally an existential crisis to, bring all of this stuff to the surface. Everyone will have times in their life where they question what they're doing and why they're doing it, and there's always a catalyst for that. It could be health scare or aging or something. There's lots of catalysts to that. But what's unique about this time is everybody in the entire world is kind of going through something sort of similar. I've thought about this a lot because I've worked in a lot of roles in, I was a teacher and I was leading expeditions overseas and working in leadership development, and then I was coaching, and then I was working with, in organizations in people and culture roles. And I kind of needed to distill what it is, because I tried lots of things and some worked and some didn't. And there's a lot that you can kind of pull off the shelf to sort of apply to making the world of work a better place for people. And there's a lot that, it's a lot and it's overwhelming. And where do you start? For me, what it boils down to are two things, which I consider to be the fundamentals. If we just start with this, then we're heading in the right direction. First thing is self-awareness.
Yep.
And the second thing is empathy. I don't think you can do anything that's going to be of lasting value or significant impact, that's going to create change, unless you have those two skills, which are not just skills you develop, but they are practices that you are always aware of and developing. Self-awareness is that personal responsibility piece.
Yeah.
Right. You don't change a culture or a relationship by changing others and demanding or expecting change of them, or by changing the circumstances, which people work. It starts with you. We know this.
Relationships. You don't change a relationship by changing someone else. You change a relationship by changing, by working on yourself.
That's where we have to start. We have to start with self-awareness, and what sort of flows from that, or what's complementary to that at the same time is empathy, because we don't ever do anything in isolation. There's always, everything we do always has an impact. So self-awareness and taking responsibility for what it is that we bring to a culture is essential. And empathy, to understand the impact outside of our awareness and outside of our own experience, is also, essential as well. And these are not things that you just kind of develop over time. They're specific, they're tangible, they're teachable skills that we need to learn all the time in the workplace and in everywhere. And I say in the workplace, and I'm focusing on the workplace because where else do you spend as much time during the day, interact with as many people, have the kind of have a significant influence and impact. Your personal relationships and your family, you do that. But the workplace is the other place where you spend that much, so much time. And typically, in the past, self-awareness and empathy are the kind of skills that might be touched on in a personal development or / professional development course at work. But typically they're things we learn outside of work, on a weekend retreat, or we might go and do some study or whatever. But these things need to be the fundamentals of, what we teach and learn and talk about at work.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it's about setting that culture that enables people to have the mindset that coming to work provides an opportunity for personal growth and not just to checkbox or, hit the position description or, or mark off on your KPIs. So if people know that I'm coming to work, and another benefit of being at work is not the paycheck and is not, the sense of achievement of the actual core business related stuff, but is actually that I get to develop myself personally and grow as a person, and that I have an opportunity to do that through every single interaction that I have and every relationship that I have, whether it's a co-worker or whether it's the person in the mail room, or whether it's the admin person, or whether it's the CEO of the company, that every opportunity, every interaction and every conversation I have is an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, you mentioned the, it's kind of great resignation, zeitgeist that's being talked about at the moment. A couple of years ago, before the pandemic, one of the greatest drivers of engagement in the workplace was a sense of growth. So that, it was people learning, growing in their role, through their role as, as individuals and also as professionals. A sense of growth was the most, at least top 2 or top 3 drivers of engagement. And now what's happened recently is that's dropped down, and what's replaced that as a primary driver of engagement is a sense of meaning and contribution to something other than a paycheck. Now, that's always been the reason why a lot of people go to work, but there's not. It's for so many more now. It's not a luxury to. Or an ideal to have a role that is, kind of fulfills what you consider your life's purpose to be. Now it's an expectation, and it's a fundamental need now, because if we are, if the world of work is changing, and if we're being forced, to change and at least think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, then we may as well, spend our time working, doing something that matters to us, because when we're faced with an existential crisis and we're asking the big questions, we want to learn from that, and we want to evolve from that. And so we want to go to work to do something that actually matters to us now. And workplaces can't get away with not acknowledging that and not addressing that and not enabling that and facilitating that for people. And it's going to be different for everyone, but I guess if not the power, but at least the focus has shifted from employers saying, all right, I'm going to give you some I'm going to pay you to come and do a job, but here's my expectations of you, and here's how, here's what you need to do in order for that exchange to be of value. Now people are kind of power shifted back to the people, and people are going like, I'll come and work for you, but I need to be getting something out of it. And it's not a selfish expectation or a selfish need. It's a need for the greater good. And so employers, which is wonderfully overdue, and I'm loving this, are having to go, well, shit, what are we doing, and why are we doing, and how is it adding value to people's lives, whether it be our employees or our customer or the planet at large. We're making them ask those questions and answer those questions, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I read recently, and I can't remember who wrote it, but I read an article recently that was talking about the Great Resignation, and reframed it as, which I absolutely loved, into the Great Realignment. And so that's, basically a lot of what you've just shared, in that idea that we have to, in order to keep for companies to keep good people, we need to really focus on a great realignment. So whether it be realignment to their own values, realignment to the value of the values and the mission and the vision of the company. And I think that in itself needs to be reassessed. I think a lot of companies do probably need to go back to the drawing board and have a look at their vision, mission and value statements and go, do these still exist? And I think we really need to spend some time rewriting them and rewriting them in a way that incorporates a people-centric approach.
A people-centric approach and an awareness of the responsibility that we have to, I'm talking from a perspective of an employer. The responsibility that as an employer I have to the people that work for me, with me, and the planet in which, and the culture and the environment, the context in which we work. We cannot, this pandemic and the response to it has forced people to become far more aware of the impact of their individual actions.
Yes.
Now we're starting to then go, well, all right, well, I'm taking responsibility for my actions, or at least I'm accountable to my actions. What about what about this company or that business or my employer? I'm starting to question their impact and their intentions now, and they're being held more to account, which is wonderful also. So I kind of see this great resignation leading to an alignment, and at the same time it's a great reckoning.
Yes.
It's a reckoning, and everybody's being held to account, and we're seeing what happens when you lift the lid, right? It's messy, and with a greater sense of accountability, we're starting to see some changes, but it gets really messy first, because the systems that have been operating in the way in which they have for so long, which have, primarily supported, very few, typically white middle-aged men, or those at the top of the, that kind of capitalist patriarchal pyramid, which are very few people. It's never been okay, but it's been too much of a momentum behind that for any, real sort of fundamental changes to be made. But that's happening now, because everybody's going, well, we can't keep living and working like this. It's destroying people, it's destroying the planet, and it's destroying, what else is there? It's destroying the fabric of everything. And it's not just a concept now, or a belief, or a perspective that that's what's happening. It's fundamentally clear that it's not working. And so this reckoning is like, well, how do we fix this? And there are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of organizations, a lot of systems that are scrambling just to kind of patch it up. You can't do that anymore. It's not going to fly. It's not possible. And so it's I think it's an important, it's a disruptive and a difficult time, but it's entirely necessarily and long overdue.
Yeah, and it just presents a real opportunity. And it's interesting, because when you talk about the fact of it being, we've been operating, and society operates, and it still does, in a very patriarchal model, and companies generally, most companies, some smaller businesses have, changed a lot of stuff, but bigger companies generally operate in a patriarchal model. And I think that what's been really interesting in this time period when people have been working from home is that it's dismantled the patriarchy a little bit, because everybody has had those experience of, of being sort of more on an even keel, in that, just even in the example, I know this is like such a basic thing, but even on the fact that meetings and conversations are all happening pretty much over Zoom, even just the basics of being at the same level and not one person standing up and one person sitting down, like just little things like that, where we're all on the same level, and there's no micromanaging. It has to be much more macro managed. Everybody has to take personal responsibility. You've got families where kids have been home working from school, so fathers have had that opportunity more so to see the balance that mothers have often taken between work and home stuff. There's just this interlaying of all these different worlds and all these different ways that we've been forced to come together, which I think dismantle some of those outdated systems.
Yes, it's so true. It's so true. And you know, it's what you know, you're kind of doing this, and I think what's happening is there's a clash. We're clashing because what we've taken for granted as being the way things are, and taken it for granted, not because it's working or because it serves us or others or the, you know, most people, we take for granted just because it's so embedded, this way of these systems and this way of working. But now this clash is happening, and before, I think there's this really important step, a really important stage that needs to happen now. Because what's happening is we're going, this isn't working. We need to replace this broken model with a better one. Mm-hmm. But there's a really important stage in between where we have to go, well, let's look at why this model was perpetuated for so long in the first place. We need to undo some of that whilst we build a better one at the same time. But that's people who have been in power and who have been served, who have benefited and privileged by virtue of that power, which wasn't theirs. But, you know, it's a legacy of, you know, patriarchy and so many other, you know, economic systems which are inherently unfair. People aren't going to let go of that readily just because it's the right thing to do. So there's what's necessary is supporting this transition so that we kind of build a bridge from a broken system to a better system. But we have to build that bridge by helping people understand how to let go, or how to reconcile, or how to take responsibility, how to change behaviors so that it is, you know, it is more aligned to a more equitable model. But that just doesn't happen because it needs to. It doesn't happen because it's the right thing to do. It happens because, well, it will happen when we kind of learn how to support each other through it. You know what I mean? So I think there's, you know, we're really quick to blame and shame and cancel people, which I understand is a response to, you know, to whatever the situation is. But it doesn't. I don't think it's going to help in the long run. There has to be a sort of a reckoning, but with some rehabilitation and some support to re-engineer something that's, you know, that's better than what it was. And again, that just doesn't happen overnight. I think shame and blame and cancelling and being exiled is the reason why so many people cling to and wield power in the first place, because they're so bloody terrified of being, you know, being exiled or abandoned. But, you know, we can't solve that problem. We can't solve the outcome of that problem by not addressing that problem in the first place, which is, you know, we can't shame people into different better ways of behaving. Like it never worked, never, and it's not going to. So we have to find a better way. And I think self-awareness and empathy are two essential kind of tools that we need to be, you know, sharpening as we do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, there's so much of what you just said. I was like, wrote this word, that word. I was just taking notes because so many things came to mind when you were speaking then, and I don't know which part to start on. But, you know, I think that this idea that we are really presented with a choice and an opportunity to do things differently, and we either take up that choice and embrace the opportunity, or we try to go, that's too uncomfortable and I just need to sit in the space of things that I'm familiar with, and that feels a lot easier, and that that doesn't feel like, because discomfort is painful. And, you know, a lot of humans, most humans do not like pain. I mean, who likes pain? And so we sort of try to escape the uncomfortable situations, and push them aside and move forward and rush to the next thing, because sitting in that space doesn't feel good. But if we don't sit in that space, like you said, then we're just going to continue to perpetuate this old, outdated way that in the end is not sustainable. So, yeah, I was thinking when you were saying that we really need to, like, the culture shift between rushing to achieve needs to stop. And we need to just stop, slow down, which is what this whole situation has often given us as well, this opportunity to slow down and realize the benefit of that, and coming back to that personal development skill of patience. You know, that's that personal, like, that a lot of people don't really have as much anymore. And if we don't have that patience to do this slowly, we're going to lose the opportunity that we've just been given to do it differently and have a reset.
Yep. Couldn't agree more with that. So this is what's really interesting for me, is like, that's spot on. And so we know theory, there's enough people who know what to do or what needs to be done.
Yep.
And we've known this for a long time, but now it's just pretty urgent. What's really interesting for me now is okay, how do we do this?
How do we do it? Yeah.
How? Okay. And what I think is really important is to not go straight to a strategy of how, because it implies there's a solution. Yes. And it implies that we know how to fix something. What we need to do first, again, in that kind of bridging space, is to sit with some paradoxes. Yes. And to sit with some the discomfort and of not knowing, and the discomfort of knowing that, how, like, the default to solutions, the default to fixing, or the default to panicking and doing something is what has got us into this problem in the first place. And so just holding some space, and you mentioned patience, it's holding some space for I don't know how to do this yet, and that's okay, because if we don't allow that discomfort and become a little bit comfortable in that discomfort, and just knowing that that's a paradox, then we're going to miss, as you say, we're going to miss this opportunity. And change and deconditioning is really painful. And let's just acknowledge that, so that when it happens, we don't balk at it in the same way which we used to, and we don't shy away from it in the same way that we used to. And it's just human nature to do that, but we have to change that, and we can change it. And one of the ways which we can do that is just by talking about it. And so that when we are really panicked or anxious or overwhelmed with not knowing what to do, to normalize that experience, and to have some tools to self-regulate, so that we can just go through it, as opposed to bypassing it, because the bypassing hasn't got us anywhere, and we can't keep doing that anymore. So that sitting in the discomfort, sitting in the tension, sitting in the not knowing space. I mean, we're becoming more prepared to do that by virtue of the circumstances that we're all faced with, right? And we're being dragged through this experience, kicking and screaming, just hoping, and when's it going to be over, so we can go back to this. Yeah. Normal's long gone, but we can go back to a sense of control. We don't have that. And this, any sense of control that we had was an illusion anyway. Always has been. But now it's pretty clear that we can't control things, because the way in which we have tried to control them has really been destructive for so many people. So there's just sitting with that, in that transitionary kind of liminal, I don't know, discomfort, pain. I mean, who wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to do that. But I think there's something more painful than doing that, and that is just to ignore it and pretend that it's not happening.
Yeah,
we just prolonging the inevitable, which is the reckoning of something needs to change, and it's going to feel painful, and it's going to feel like an ending and a death of, and then there's a grief that's associated with that. But again, it's one of those things that we just don't talk about, because culturally we're love and light, and we don't talk about the things that are hard and difficult. So this is our opportunity, as you say, this is our opportunity to do that. And I think as we do, just to be kind to ourselves and each other throughout this process is going to be one of the most important things we can do. Canceling each other for not getting it right is not going to help.
Absolutely. And that, it's just bringing, again, back to bringing your full self to the environment and being okay with that, and giving yourself permission to do that, and giving each other permission to do that. And then having that self-compassion and that compassion for others when it's messy and it doesn't come out right, and then being able to have an agreement that says, if we don't understand, or if I feel triggered, I have the permission to inquire, and, just making that assumption that if you feel really like you want to react or explode at what somebody says or the way that someone is interacting, that instead of having the default of defense, you have the default that says, I must be missing some information here. I need to ask some questions. I need to try to gain more information so I have a greater understanding, and rather assuming that you know nothing or you don't know enough, and seeing that as a good thing to create a better connection, than seeing it like, I know everything and therefore I can make this judgment and make this assumption on the situation because I'm so, I know, and I know it all. And, that's obviously a really disconnecting, way of dealing with things. And you don't get that, that power that comes with, therefore, that curiosity and inquiry that we need so much in our conversations.
Yep. And that's self-awareness, right? That's the self-awareness. And I think if we, what you're talking about just now, and if we have these conversations and address these challenges in a work context, outside work, just everywhere, if these are the kind of conversations that we're having, then I think that's the first and it's the essential step to addressing all of the symptoms of not doing that, all of the symptoms that that are what we're faced with at the moment. Like, you don't fix the problem with the same kind of thinking that created the problem in the first place. We've got to go back, and we've all got to do that. We all have a responsibility for our role in that. And that's the work, and to develop and nurture workplace cultures that support that work is now, a few years ago it was ping pong tables and slides and perks and benefits. Now people, this whole experience of the last 18 months has really distilled people's values to some fundamentals, and now we're talking about meaning and purpose and contribution and things that are far more important to us than the perks, because we've had some of those some of the things that we took for granted taken away from us, and we don't really need. A lot of people are realizing, that's not really what matters to me most. My health and my family and my connections and my community and my work and how it impacts the world and how I feel about that. These are the things that are important to us, always have been, but we've been spoiled, I think. And so now it's time to get back to those fundamentals.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, there's so much. Yeah, there's so much to cover, isn't there, in all of this? And it is, definitely an area, like I said right in the beginning, that personal development piece, which is that self-awareness and that self-knowledge, and starting from that place and really, acknowledging and pausing and acknowledging what we need to do to move forward, and just acknowledging all got work to do. And that's actually brilliant, not bad. It's, if we can keep learning, I mean, what are we here for? We're here to keep growing, and we're here to keep learning. And ultimately, I think that this this pandemic, or this situation, has really hit home to the idea that we are, if I think that, I mean, I personally have come to the conclusion, which I'm sure will change over time, but the conclusion that our purpose on this planet is to master being comfortable with discomfort. And that's the road. And each time we're presented in different situations, whether they're situations of grief for whatever reason, it's that, how do I be more comfortable with this, this really uncomfortable situation? And once you get good at that, then so many things will be so much better.
It's the price of admission. Like, nobody gets to live a life without grief and suffering. We just, you can't. It's not, to live and to be a human being is to suffer and to grieve and to experience loss and heartbreak and disappointment. Problem is, it's not what we're sold, right? It's not talked about. And when we do experience loss and suffering and sadness, or it's as though something's wrong. It's not. It's just part of being a human being. So the more we can talk about that, and we've lost. I mean, I've been reading a lot and listening to a lot of teachings by Francis Weller, who's a psychotherapist, and he talks a lot about grief and rituals and initiation. And in the Western culture, in which I'm, a part of, we don't have rituals around grief. We might, I had a loss. There was a loss in our family early this year, and there was a funeral, but very few people could attend because of restrictions and so on. But that was it. When it comes to initiation through stages of life, we've lost those, and so we don't know how to. Boys don't know how to become men, and we, in various stages of initiation through life, through midlife, or through aging, and through death, and through the inevitable loss of our ability to do things, and even just the loss of our freedom to travel and do things we used to do. I mean, these are all experiences that we aren't prepared for, because we've lost a lot of the rites of passage that would facilitate that, and not only do we suffer for not having it, but we're missing out on the benefit of what comes from the other side of that initiation. The wisdom, the experience, the being able to come back to a community with what it is that you've learned. Elders and elderhood is not something that we celebrate. We put old people away, out of sight, out of mind, put them in homes, and in the workplace, millennials are celebrated as being, they are the future. By 2025, 75% of the workplace will be millennials, which is awesome. But there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of experience, and there's a lot of really necessary contribution that an older generation it has, that is going to be lost. And I think we're really craving that, and we're going to really notice the absence of it if we don't talk about and start to really process a lot of the grief that is a very collective experience at the moment. I
couldn't agree more. I think that's where I'm not particularly into a lot of the things that religion provides, and the division that a lot of religion provides. But the one beautiful thing I think that religion or provides is the spirituality of ritual. And so often these things that you just talked about, you see in a lot of religions or a lot of tribal organizations, like, like an Aboriginal community, or, just more of a culture or a religion that provides these multi-generation, like intergenerational relationships, and those rites of passage and those rituals around grief, around death, or rituals around whatever. And I think that as we're moving into more of the modern world, religion is becoming less and less, which has its benefits, but what we're losing with that is a lot of the ritual that is offered in those sort of situations, which we need to maybe work is something that can replace that. Because even if you said that we're going to have a 75% millennial organisations, well, maybe that needs to be looked at as well, and that a workplace is a place where often, I haven't worked inside of a corporate company for a long time, but I know in the past when I did, I was in my 20s and I got that opportunity to really interact with people that were in their 50s and 60s and 30s, and it gave that opportunity for these different age groups to really learn from each other, and that mentorship, and that the way that we speak to different people of different generations, and maybe there's an opportunity there as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I feel like I love that you're identifying your purpose as being that at the moment, because it's so necessary. It's so necessary, and we don't realize the absence, or the impact of the absence of knowing how to grieve until we are grieving, and then we just fall apart because we don't know how to. So I couldn't think of a more important and timely purpose to be supporting people through whatever the application that is for you. But I think it's so important.
Well, thank you. That was really good to just chat around so many things, and I hope other people found that beneficial, because we had, that was just great having that conversation and being able to explore all those different areas of, how personal development really contributes to professional development, and how we have to really bring together the work and the life, or that work is a part of life, and really bring that whole person approach to work, and allow ourselves to be more vulnerable, and not let shame rule us, and dismantle some of those patriarchal systems in workplaces and in society. And and I think we covered so much more, but really approaching conversations in a way that embraces all different cultures, takes our self-knowledge into account, and takes personal responsibility when we're contributing to all interactions. Is that a good summary?
That's an amazing summary. I'm thinking if we could do all of that, then then we're sorted. For those people who are listening, we had a conversation yesterday about what we might talk about, and we had quite a long conversation about all sorts of things, and we sort of settled on a bit of a theme or an approach. I'm not sure if we stuck to that, but it doesn't really matter, because I think what's important is, for me to communicate is that we're better off asking questions that expand our awareness of that which we don't know than we are to provide answers to questions, because that's what we think we should do. So if this conversation has just opened up a whole lot of questions, then that I think that's the point, because we have to find new ways of doing things. And this well-being, wellness, work culture, engagement, employee experience, it's really complicated. And there's not a single solution or approach or strategy that's going to work for everyone. So again, just normalizing what we don't know and conversations around that take something that we don't know and expand it so that we realize how much more we don't know, that we didn't even realize we didn't know. That's good. I think that's healthy, because it's getting closer to acknowledging the reality that we're all experiencing. You know?
And embracing our differences.
Yeah. And talking about it, and not, and talking about some difficult and uncomfortable things. Is important too, because if we don't, then the more we avoid those, the greater they kind of fester, and now's the time, as I said before, lift the lid and let's just see what's going on. Let's just look at the mess and see how we can avoid replicating that in the future.
That's exactly. And embrace the mess too, embrace the mess as we're transitioning. Yep,
totally. We've got to go through it, and it's messy and it's dark and it's uncomfortable and we're not there yet, and we're not
like probably, that. If no one has read The Bear Hunt, as a kid.
Yes.
It's like exactly what we need to do. You got to go through it.
Yeah.
Don't go over it. Don't go under it. Go through it.
Yeah, that's right. I remember reading that to a friend of mine who's, he was, I think, 3 or something. And I love children's books. I love movies. I watched the Never-Ending Story recently, which was a favorite movie growing up, and I watched it for the first time since I was a kid, and I was blown away by how well it kind of stood up or held up over the years, because these are themes and they're myths and archetypes of humans and how we experience life. And we might think that this is the first time we've been faced with a crisis like this, but it's not. It's just different to the ones that have been experienced through generations in the past, and there's a lot of wisdom that is embedded in those learnings and those myths. And so we can learn a lot from those if we take the time to listen.
I think that's a key point to just end on there, is that if we can take wisdom from the situation and apply it to create a better system, or that works well for everybody, that isn't necessarily working better for some and not so good for others, that is a little bit more equitable, then we're doing really well.
Yep. And if we're not doing that, then we're doing the wrong work.
And Michael, is there a way that they can connect with you?
Yes. Probably the best way is I've got a podcast and a newsletter which I do most weeks. So the best way to find all of that information is through Instagram. Mikey.Ellis is my Instagram account. So Linktree there will point you in that direction. That's probably a good place to start.
Excellent. Well, I'll put all those details on the show notes, and I might put a link as well to your podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah. Excellent. So if you've listened to today's conversation, I know it's probably been a little bit longer than some others. So if you've made it to this point, thank you for staying with us. We would love to know maybe what's your biggest insight or takeaway from today's conversation. If you could leave us a comment and let us know, that would be great. If you wherever you're listening to, you just put a comment down, and then we can have a look at that. That would be awesome. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with your friends and consider subscribing to the Wellthy Living podcast on iTunes and on YouTube. And to find out more about my services, you can visit my website at wellthyliving.com.au or connect with me on any of my social media channels. So until next time, remember, connection is medicine.